and it's on cherry picking and network containment. So the outline for the talk, I'll first go over the motivation of why we're actually studying this problem. So what network containment is and why we need to solve it, and how we can use these cherry reductions to solve the network containment problem for certain classes of networks. So to do this, we'll have to define some terminology. So we'll go over some cherry reductions for a given network. And we'll see that these cherry reductions will give some sequence of ordered pairs, and these ordered pairs represent the cherries. And in the third part of the talk, I'll talk about the connection between these sequences and this network containment. And finally, I'll show that this network containment problem can be solved in linear time for tree-child networks. So first off, let's start with the motivation. First, I need just the basic definition of what a network is and what it means for a network to contain another network. So let me start there. So basically, you have a phylogenetic network which has a single root of in degree 0 and out degree 1. So this is the vertex labeled rho as a red node. And you have 3 vertices of in degree 1 and out degree 2. So you have these blue vertices. There's 3 of them here. You can also have reticulation vertices, which can have in degree at least 2 and out degree 1. And here, if you're looking at a binary network, usually the in degree is exactly 2, but we look at we allow reticulations to have in degree at least 2. And it'll become clear why we need this sort of non-restrictive definition. And finally, we have the leaves. So these are the species that we're studying, and these have in degree 1 and out degree 0. So this is a network on the taxa set A, B, C, and it's got 1 reticulation in it. And I should also add that the edges leading into reticulations, so the edges where the arrowhead is pointing towards this green vertex, they're called reticulation edges. And also one more last note. So the edges are generally directed downwards from the root towards the leaves. But I will omit these arrows in all the following figures because they just clutter up the diagrams. So what does it mean for a network to contain another network? Well, a network n on x contains another network n prime on x prime if if n prime, so this is the smaller network, can be obtained from n, the larger network, by deleting some reticulation edges, deleting all out degree 0 vertices not labeled by x prime. So these are all leaves that are leaves within the larger network, but that are not leaves within the smaller network. And finally, suppressing degree 2 vertices. And the reason why we suppress degree 2 vertices is to ensure that we don't end up with these vertices, because within networks, you cannot have a vertex of in degree 1 and out degree 1. So at the bottom here, we have an example of when a network n contains a network n prime. So n prime is a network on the taxa set x prime here, 1, 2, and 4. And the middle network n is a network on the taxa set 1, 2, 3, 4. And you can see in the very right diagram how n prime is contained in n. So first, we delete this red reticulation edge here. And then secondly, we have to delete all out degree 0 vertices that are not labeled by x prime. So that leaf, so a leaf that appears in n that does not appear in n prime, one of them is this leaf here, 3. So we remove this leaf and of course, any incident edges to it. And at that point, this blue reticulation vertex here, it also becomes an out degree 0 vertex that is not labeled by x prime. So we have to delete this vertex as well. And at that time, we also delete all incident edges to this blue reticulation vertex. And finally, we have to suppress all degree 2 vertices. So these are indicated in gray, right? So this is what it means for a network to contain another network. And now we can formally define the problem that we're studying today. So the problem is called network containment. And for the input, you're given two networks, n and n prime, and you're asked to see whether n contains n prime or not. And so what is the biological motivation for this? Why are we actually studying this problem? Suppose that you say you know the true phylogeny of the species that you're studying, and you have a species network to sort of describe the evolutionary history of these guys. And you look at a small stretch of DNA, it might be a gene, for these species, and they may evolve tree-like, right, instead of evolving network-like. Or it could also evolve network-like. But what you really want to check is that the species network that you have describes the evolutionary history of these small stretches of DNA. So you really need that these genes that evolve tree-like or network-like is actually contained in the species network. And so for that reason, this problem is relevant in biology. And this problem is also NP hard, because the more restricted tree containment problem, where for your instance you have a network N and a tree T, and the question asks, does N contain T? It's already been shown to be NP hard by Kanj et al. So of course, when we generalize the problem to networks, then it also has to be NP hard. So next up, I'll be talking about some cherry reduction. So these are graph operations that you can do. We say, and we're basically focusing on two particular subgraphs that are formed by two leaves of the network. So we say two leaves form a cherry if they share a common parent. So you can see at the bottom, or at the leftmost figure here, I've just taken the part of the network that just contains XY. So there may be something else going on up here that leads to an even bigger network, but we're only interested in the subgraph that sort of contains these two leaves. So in this case, we say that XY forms a cherry. And we say that XY forms a reticulated cherry if the parent of Y is a parent of the parent of X, and the parent of X is a reticulation. So if you have something like this in the middle figure. And at the very right, we have an example of a network. And here we see that the only cherries that this network contain is the cherry 4, 5, because 4 and 5 share a common parent. And we see that for the reticulated cherries, we see that the parent of 3 is a reticulation. And the parent of, the parent of this reticulation is a vertex. It's got two parents here, or 3 actually, but these two are the more important ones. And we see that this guy is a parent of 1. So 3, 1 is a reticulated cherry, and also 3, 2 is a reticulated cherry. And so what can we do with these cherries and reticulated cherries? Well, one graph operation we can define is a reduction of these pairs from a network. So let's say you have a cherry XY in your network. And again, this is just showing the part of the network that really focuses on these two leaves. And there could be something coming off of the top here, but we're not very interested in that. And if you have a cherry XY, we reduce XY from N by first deleting the leaf X, and also deleting the leaf incident to X, right? And then so we end up with this middle figure here. And then we suppress any and all degree 2 vertices that you got from deleting the leaf, right? So we end up with this guy here. And now if you have a reticulated cherry X, Y, then what you essentially do is you say you delete the edge between the parent of y and the parent of x. So in this case, that's the edge PQ, right? So when we delete this edge, we get this graph over here, and we suppress any and all degree 2 vertices that arise from this edge deletion. And again, the reason why we suppress these degree 2 vertices is to ensure that the resulting graph is a network. So we have a way of reducing cherries and reticulated cherries from networks. This means that you can reduce a network by successively reducing cherries and reticulated cherries. And this gives a sequence of pairs in which where these pairs correspond to either a cherry or a reticulated cherry. So let's look at this example right here. At the very left, we have a network on 1, 2, 3, 4. At this point, 2, 1 forms a reticulated cherry, and 3, 4 forms a cherry. We just choose to reduce 3, 4 first, and what that does, of course, is delete the leaf 3 and suppress any degree 2 vertices. So we end up with this network over here. And here we see that 2, 1 is a reticulated cherry, 2, 4 is also a reticulated cherry, but we choose to reduce 2, 1. And of course, that deletes the edge between the parent of 1 and the parent of 2, and we end up with this network. Now we reduce 2, 4, delete this reticulation edge, we end up with a tree, and then it's just a matter of finding cherries and then picking the leaves from it, right? So the question is, do all phylogenetic networks, can they all be reduced by some sequence of pairs? And the answer is no. So this gives us a class of networks. And we say that a network is a cherry-picking network if it can be reduced by a sequence of pairs that we just described above. And these cherry-picking networks were also independently discovered by Peter Erdős, Mike Steele, and Charles Semple. And in their paper, it was called Orchard Networks. And they used a measure called ancestral profiles to find them. So here we have an example of a cherry-picking network. Remember, this is the one that we saw on the previous slide. So we know that it is reducible by picking cherries and reticulated cherries. And on the right here, we have a network that is not a cherry-picking network. And the reason why this is not a cherry-picking network is because the parent of 2 is a reticulation. Now, what that means is at some point, we want to pick a pair that contains 2 as a reticulated cherry. But we see that that both parents of this reticulation, so these 2 red nodes, are both reticulations, meaning that this 2 can never be in a reticulated cherry. And that's also by so if you were to reduce some other parts of the network, it only changes the neighborhood within where those cherries and reticulated cherries were picked. So these 2 red nodes and this reticulation vertex is never going to be changed. So this network is not a cherry picking network. And what we showed in this paper and what Erdős et al. Showed in their paper was that actually, if you have a cherry picking network, then it can be reduced in any order. So what do I mean by this? Well, here you have the reticulated cherry 2, 1 or 3, 4. In the previous slide, we started by picking 3, 4, but we can also find a sequence of pairs that starts with 2, 1 and still end up with a sequence that reduces the network. So if it's a cherry picking network, there's always a sequence and you can always pick it in any order. And essentially what this leads to is that because you can pick in any order, and because when you pick a cherry or a reticulated cherry, the new cherries and the reticulated cherries that arise in the network that you obtain is they can only contain, okay, let's just give an example here. So if we look at 2, 1, if we were to pick the reticulated cherry 2, 1, then we showed that any new cherry or reticulated cherry in the resulting network must contain either 1 or 2. So it really has to be within the neighborhood of the leaves that were involved in the cherry reduction from before. And that is the reason why you can pick a cherry picking network in linear time. All right, so I told you about this, this sequence of ordered pairs that can reduce a network. So where's the connection between the sequences and the containment? So remember this is the slide from the very beginning of the talk for when a network contains another network. So I'll just skip this. So this is one of the main results that we proved in this paper, is that suppose you have 2 networks and they're both cherry picking networks, and n is on the taxa set x and n prime is on the taxa set x prime, which is a subset of x. If a sequence of n reduces n prime, then n prime is contained in n. So this is quite a strong result, because the taxa set of the smaller networks of n prime doesn't necessarily have to be the same taxa set as the larger network. All right. So I want to give, and I won't go over the full proof, but I want to give an intuitive notion as to why this holds. So we have a network here, and let n be the network you get when you use both the gray and the black edges. And let n prime be the network that you get when you only use the black edges, right? So actually these 2 networks are the ones we saw on the previous slide. So that's this as n prime and this as n. And in here, n now is the black and gray, n prime is only the black, right? So we find a sequence for n, and of course we can pick it in any order. So we obtain this sequence S: 2, 1, 3, 2, 2, 1, 3, 4, 2, 4, 1, 4. And this reduces n to a single leaf network, right? Now, the same sequence also reduces the n prime, the smaller network. But the thing is, because n prime is a smaller network, not every ordered pair within the sequence actually reduces something in n prime. What do I mean by this? Well, if we look at the very first deletion here, so we know 2, 1 is a reticulated cherry in n prime, which is a smaller network. So of course, when we apply 2, 1 to both networks, it will affect both networks, right? It's going to delete this reticulation edge over here. But when we next pick 3, 2, well, 3 is not even a leaf in n prime, so it's not going to do anything. That's fine. So we end up over here. And then 2, 1 is a reticulated cherry in n prime, so it does something. So this edge becomes deleted. And then, oh, I think I have a mistake here. Yeah, so right here, this gray edge should be a black edge. This should be a black edge as well. But so I wanted to give an intuition for why this is true. Well, because when you reduce a cherry or a reticulated cherry, you're basically either removing a leaf or you're deleting a reticulation edge. So the reverse operation should be possible, right? And this is how we can imagine why this is true, because so S is the sequence that reduces n, S prime is the sequence that reduces n prime. So we will build back this network n using the sequence S, And then every time we meet a coordinate that is also used in S prime, we sort of label the edge. So right here, we start with a single leaf network 4, and we add a cherry 1, 4 over here. Now 1, 4 is also used in S prime. So we have to, we label this edge, so the edge is black. And second, here, when we add the cherry 2, 4, so this is where the mistake is in the figure, I apologize. So this should actually also be black, right? And when we come to 3, 4, when we add the cherry 3, 4, then this edge, well, it's not used in S prime, so we leave it grayed out. And by doing this sort of, wait. Oh, no, there is no mistake in here. I'm sorry if that was super confusing, but there's no mistake here because this right here is the cherry. So the figure is doing what it's supposed to do. Okay, but basically, when you build back the network, you just pay attention to each pair that is also used in the reduction of the smaller network. And whenever those pairs appear, you basically label the edges with a black. And then you end up with the embedding of the smaller network in the larger network. So the important question is the converse true? And unfortunately, it's not, because you can have this tree here, T, this network here, N, and T is contained in N. And you can see this by looking at the red edges, but no sequence that reduces N will reduce T. And I won't go over why, but for those that are curious, I can explain it maybe after the talk. So what now? So what people tend to do, or what is a method that's generally done in phylogenetics, is you just look at a restricted class of networks so that the problem becomes a bit easier. And the network that we want to look at now is the tree-child networks. And what's cool about tree-child networks is, or the definition of a tree-child network is that every non-leaf vertex has a child that is a tree vertex or a leaf. So the very leftmost network is a tree child. The middle one is not tree child because this red reticulation vertex, its only child is a reticulation vertex. And another forbidden shape for tree child networks is for a tree vertex to have 2 reticulation children. I think I'm going to skip this slide. So the main point for restricting to tree-child networks is that if you have 2 tree-child networks on the same set of taxa, then if N, the smaller network, N prime, is contained in N, then any tree-child sequence that reduces N also must reduce N prime. And that's really the key theorem for tree-child networks. And this uses a special, this uses a special mechanism from these tree-child sequences, and there are conditions that are imposed on them so that when you construct a network from a tree-child sequence, you always get a tree-child network. And actually, tree-child sequences were introduced by Simone Lintz and Charles Semple as a way of tackling the hybridization number problem. And I wanted to go over the sort of the intuition behind the proof of why this is true and why it doesn't hold for general cherry picking networks, but I'm looking at the time and I think I'm running out, so I'm just going to skip this. So for the network containment problem for tree-child networks, how do we actually solve this? Well, if you're given 2 tree-child networks N and N prime on the same set of taxa, then what you can do is you can first find a tree-child sequence that reduces N, right? And remember, we can pick in any order, so that's really nice. And now you apply this sequence to N prime and see if it reduces N prime. if it reduces n prime, then by the previous theorem, n prime must also be contained in n, right? And if it doesn't reduce it, then n prime is not contained in n. So here are examples of instances. So you have the network, sort of the larger network n. You have two instances, n1 and this should say n2. And this is a positive instance. So this is when n1 is contained in n. And this is when n2 is not contained in n. And you see that we take some tree-child sequence S that reduces n. And if you apply S to n1, then n1 will be reduced by S, whereas n2 will not be reduced by S. And yeah, that's basically how the algorithm works. And we supervised a bachelor's student, Robert Hausman, and he improved our algorithm and also implemented it in Python. And you can see that yeah, even for instances where the number of leaves is 1,000 and the number of reticulations is 1,000 for both the network and the subnetwork that you're looking at, the running time is very, very low. And yeah, so we basically ran yes instances and no instances. And the reason why the yes instances run longer in general, run slower in general, is because when you have a yes instance, then you're required to reduce the subnetwork, sort of the second network, by applying the sequence to it. But when you have a no instance, then the sequence is of course not going to reduce the second network completely, so you get a bit of a time save there. In conclusion, reducing a cherry-picking network can be done in any order. So this is not only tree-child networks, but cherry-picking networks in general. And remember, cherry-picking networks are the networks that can be reduced by these cherry and reticulated cherry reductions. Now, for cherry-picking networks, if you're given two networks, then if a sequence for the first network also reduces the second network, then the second network is contained in the first network. The converse is not true, unfortunately, but it is true if you restrict to the space of tree-child networks. And because of this, network containment can be solved in linear time for tree-child networks. And yeah, our implementation results show that the linear theoretical running time can be achieved in practice. What you can find in the paper, so we generalize our methods for non-binary networks. I think I'm just going to skip this. And then some open questions, open problems. So we still don't know if network containment is actually polynomial time or NP hard for cherry-picking networks. And when I introduced tree-child networks, I introduced them as with forbidden shapes. So I said that tree-child networks cannot contain two particular forbidden shapes. We still don't know if cherry-picking networks can be characterized also by forbidden shapes. And yeah, I'd like to thank the Netherlands Organization for Scientific Research for funding this research. And thanks very much.
Okay, thanks for your nice talk. We already have two questions in the chat, so let me just read them out to you. So the first one is, for a given family of networks, let's consider level K networks, how many of them can be cherry-picking networks? I just want to know the size of distribution in a given family.
That's a good question. I wouldn't be able to give a straight answer. I'm not sure. So level 1, and let's see. No, I'm really not sure about this one. So we didn't really look at levels when we were considering cherry-picking networks.
Yuki, I guess it'll be small, right?
Yes,
it'll be small.
It should be. It should be very, very small.
Zero. Yeah, particularly as K grows.
Yes, because you can have a bunch of these yeah, just reticulations on top of reticulations that we saw before. And we actually know that cherry picking networks are subclasses of tree-based networks. So if we know something about how many networks in level K networks are tree-based, if we know the ratio there, then maybe we can work something out.
Okay, and the second question was about the network on slide 12. So Mareike, do you want to ask the question? So the question was whether that was reducible at all.
Yes, I was wondering what is the flavor of this example? Is the example that it is reducible but not but the sequence does not reduce T, or it's just not reducible at all? It has a slightly different flavor, I guess.
Oh, right. Okay. So what I wanted to say here was that the network N is reducible. So there is a sequence of cherry and reticulated cherry reductions that reduce N to a single leaf network, but
okay, this is a cherry picking network. Okay, yeah, I think now I see it. It was just a bit fast before. Okay.
Right. Yeah.
But no sequence will work for T.
No, exactly.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, are there any further questions?
Hi, Yuki, I have a brief question.
Yeah.
So you mentioned at the end, I think on the slide where you were talking about, was it Robert's master's project?
Yes.
Yeah.
This one. Yeah.
So I think you said that he implemented it, but he also improved the algorithm you mentioned.
Yes.
Just kind of wondering what the sort of improvements he made were.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, sure. So when we do the algorithm, we have to be able to find cherries and reticulated cherries, right? And whenever we reduce a cherry or a reticulated cherry, then we again have to find new cherries and reticulated cherries in the resulting network. What we were doing before was for every, let's say, so because we allow for reticulations to have in degree more than 2, each leaf below the reticulation, so let's say X, can be in a reticulated cherry with many other leaves, depending on the in degree of the parent, right?
Yeah.
And what we were doing before was we were saying that, right, every time, so let's say X is the one below the reticulation, and let's say X comma Y is a reticulated cherry, right? Now we reduce X comma Y, and what we were originally doing is we were saying, okay, we need to find all the reticulated cherries that involve X again. But this is redundant because you already found all of these reticulated cherries beforehand.
Okay, so he had like a more efficient way of keeping track of where the cherries and
Exactly.
reticulated cherries were. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks.